It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 276 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with authors Ben Goulet-Scott and Jacob Suissa all about botanizing. The plant profile is on peas, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on Dancing with Marigolds from Christy Page of Green Prints. What's my favorite way to botanize? Be sure to listen to the end of the episode to learn about that. This episode, we're joined by Ben Goulet-Scott and Jacob Suissa. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Kathy. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
You are both the authors of a new book called Let's Botanize, 101 Ways to Connect with Plants. We're going to get into all aspects of botanizing and what that is and how we can do it. But before we dive into all of that, guys, I want to find out a bit about you. So let's start with Jacob. And Jacob, were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that specific question before. I wish. I think life, in many ways would be, maybe more efficient. Just go outside and stand. But while I don't have chlorophyll in my veins, I do feel like being outside and being around plants is sort of integral to who I am as a person. I grew up actually right outside Washington, D.C. And so I, grew up romping around the wetlands and forests of Maryland. But botany and sort of plants, my passion for them didn't manifest until my first year of college at the University of Vermont, where I fell in love with plants through an introduction to horticulture course. And honestly, it might sound very nerdy, which is maybe the theme of my life and Ben's life and the book and Let's Botanize. But I fell in love with the fact that plants build their bodies by breathing, right? And harnessing this sunlight to sort of process those powers, right? So photosynthesis. And then from there, horticulture was my first, venture into plants. And then I fell in love with botany and biodiversity when I ended up taking a field course in Costa Rica, studying tropical plant biodiversity at the University of Vermont. And so this was, after that I was hooked, right? I saw these plants and I was just like, wow, how did all this variation arise and how did it come to be? And that's what led me down the field of botany and evolutionary biology, which is then led me to Harvard University to do my PhD, which is where I met Ben, with a brief interlude actually coming back home to DC, working at the National Arboretum as an intern right after college, and then working at the Smithsonian in the sort of labs in the back of the Natural History Museum.
we have something big in common, Jacob. I was a docent at natural history in the discovery room for several years. So
Wonderful.
we may have crossed paths at either the Arboretum or that. So, Ben, how about you? Were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
I'm not sure that I was, although my dad grew up on a farm in Michigan, and I grew up in New Jersey and then Massachusetts. And growing up, we always had quite substantial garden, I would say. And I was always very aware of that and very aware of going back to visit my grandparents on the farm. Even when they stopped commercially farming, when my dad was still young, they always maintained a huge garden there. So I was around gardens, I would say, growing up, and mostly growing food. I was also an outdoors kid, but I think I was more into birds and fish at first when I was young, around plants and interested in them. But that interest in just being outside, inevitably, I was spending time around plants and noticing probably more than I could name or label growing up. But that interest in plants didn't become professional or academic until I got to grad school. I went to Harvard for my PhD as well. It's where I met Jacob and started studying plant evolution there. And my trajectory to get to plants academically started with fruit flies. I studied fruit flies and their evolutionary genetics in undergrad. And I was really just interested in evolution and biodiversity. Where does all this stuff come from? What a magnificent world to live in. Why is it so full of life? And I started getting curious about doing field work. And that's really how I ended up in the plant world, because there are certain aspects of plants that make it really easy to do field work, like mostly that they don't move and they're super abundant. So I was really excited to do field work when I got to grad school, and that led me to plants, and I sort of fell in love. I mean, I literally had to take intro botany once I got to start my PhD. But yeah, I quickly fell fully in love with plants, and making friends like Jacob helped a lot too. Was around a great community of other grad students and professors who loved plants, and that passion rubbed off, right? And sort of haven't looked back. Identify as a plant guy now, for sure.
And I think a lot of our listeners can identify with that and are hardcore plant nerds and geeks, so they're going to love this episode. And Ben, I love what you said about plants don't move. So like if you tag one, it's going to still be there, hopefully. It might pass away. It might be a dead tree when you come back to it. But if you geolocate it, pretty much it's going to be there, right, when you come back.
Yep, exactly. I was doing that with perennial herbaceous plants, tagging them in like Western Kentucky and Tennessee, go back to Massachusetts, come back the next summer. And for the most part, they were still there. So yeah, it doesn't even need to be a tree.
So Jacob, let's ask you about your current gardening situation and what you do for a living. So you have the book, of course, but for your main job.
Yeah. So I think this is true of both Ben and I, but my day job is I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. So I study and teach botany and evolutionary biology, and my research program particularly focuses on the ferns, a fantastic group of organisms and plants, especially if you want to study, biodiversity and evolution. Of course, they have the deep evolutionary history, but they are also extremely diverse. Now there are, over 11 or 12,000 species, depending on who you ask, and they're, in sort of every corner of our planet, especially, or even in some places that we might not expect them to be, like the desert Southwest, where they're actually quite diverse in the U.S. And my research program in particular focuses on the evolution of plant form, right? So I ask questions like, how do plants build their bodies? Why do we live in a world where all these ferns have different leaf shapes or, growth patterns, things like that. And yeah, I guess my garden situation at home is I have a lot of ferns in the garden, for sure.
I'm a big fern fan as well. So fascinating. And I think we'll put a link to one of our back episodes all about native ferns to this episode in the show notes. So if we don't get enough about ferns today on this episode, our listeners can check out that one too.
I will say there was a botanist, Lucien Underwood in the early 1900s. He made a statement, something along the lines of, there is no vegetative form in the botanical world as easily recognizable as ferns, as fern fronds. And so, fern fronds are these iconic, structures that are beautiful, and we sort of leverage them in horticulture quite a bit.
I think that's part of our Jungian brain way back then. Maybe that's, something primeval about the fern that we're drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Ben, your day job, and do you garden at all?
Yeah, my day job. So after grad school, I stuck around Harvard. I still work at the university, and I actually work at Harvard Forest, which is Harvard's ecology research station. And I don't do active research myself anymore. I don't run a lab here. I spend my days on the education team trying to design programs to get college students involved in the research out here. So the research out here is all about temperate forests, how they work, and how they will or won't work in similar ways moving into a changing future. But I really love my job. I love working with students and being around research and trying to connect people early in their careers with opportunities to run around the woods with different data collection devices and then come back to their computers and figure out what it all means. In terms of a garden, still say in the renting phase of my life, but looking forward to hopefully actually this year buying a place. And one of the first things I've been daydreaming about is setting up a garden. So right now I keep a bunch of houseplants, and I have a 3-year-old daughter who's very diligent about helping me water them, sometimes a little too much. And she also has her little plastic scissors, which are surprisingly effective she knows if a leaf is yellow, okay, then I'm allowed to chop it off. She's very good at keeping everything very green.
So she's looking she's like, I can't wait till that turns yellow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say I'm lucky to live close to my parents. And again, my dad always maintaining a garden. So when they moved into their current house, my brother and I helped build some raised beds, and they're always growing food plants. And my daughter's gotten to grow up, picking tomatoes and sort of keeping an eye on everything that's growing there. And she loves it. So we're really looking forward to when we can build our own garden.
Yeah, I think she's going to love that. That's awesome. And so I've been to Harvard campus and walked around. Where is the Harvard Forest in relation to the campus?
Great question. That's a great question. You'd be surprised how many Harvard undergrads I have to explain this to. So Harvard Forest is about 4,000 acres of mostly forested land, and that does not fit within the city of Cambridge or Boston. The forest is about almost a 2-hour drive west of Cambridge and Boston. It's sort of right in the middle of the state of Massachusetts, upper part of the middle of the state. It's a very rural part of the state, heavily forested, really beautiful, a great setting for me to come to work every day. And when I need a break, I take a walk in the woods, and it's awesome.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I was wondering how they were squeezing that forest down in Cambridge there.
Didn't fit.
All right. So let's botanize. That's the name of your book. That's also the name of a nonprofit and your social media channels. So how did that all come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in addition to our day jobs, so Ben and I are the co-founders and directors of what is now an educational nonprofit title and called Let's Botanize. But when we started, maybe we have a humble beginning. We were grad students, and our labs were actually based at the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, which is Harvard's, as they put it, living tree museum. And that's actually a little closer to campus. It's several miles south of Cambridge. And we just started off, during our lunch breaks, in between experiments in the lab. Whenever we needed to take a break, we would just sort of botanize around the Arboretum. So just go on, little walks, look at plants for the pure sake of just looking at them, observing them, and talking about them. And then during the pandemic, so early 2020, when we just weren't able to spend time physically together inside, we really ramped up these botanizing trips. We would go to other, natural areas around Boston and Massachusetts. And we decided that, we realized we had such a fun time with each other botanizing. Ben and I are great friends in addition to colleagues. And we thought it'd be a wonderful idea to share our passion for plants with other people. And we thought that sharing those experiences that we have with plants through videography on social media would be a good place to start. And Ben actually has a background in film, which is what he studied in addition to studying genetics, he also studied film and photography in undergrad, but I can let him tell a little bit more about that. But that's how it all started. So just like us romping around the woods, making videos, sharing our passion for plants with people. And eventually we sort of, when we grew the platform larger than just our, immediate friends and family who were commenting on our videos and telling us how much they loved us and such, we started to ask ourselves whether we had a broader mission and a broader goal. And what we realized was, yeah, we kind of do, right? We realized, and from a scientific perspective, plants form the foundation of nearly every ecosystem, with the exclusion of hydrothermal vents and some odd places like that. So, without plants, life as we know it could not exist. And so we, logically put together, well, that means, if you can care a little bit more about plants and appreciate them, then you can care a little bit more about, the planet, right? And helping combat the climate and biodiversity crises through plant appreciation. And so that's sort of what our higher mission became, is sort of helping combat the climate and biodiversity crises through botanical education. And so that's when we decided to incorporate as a formal nonprofit entity, 501c to go.
Ben, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add that when we started sharing things, we were just so excited. That feeling when you're so excited about something and you really just want to see if it connects with other people. And our initial motivations were as simple as that. But once we started getting a platform, we felt like we had a responsibility to think a little deeper about what motivated us. And that's when we arrived at the mission that Jacob laid out. And so the goal of creating a nonprofit to house this work is recognizing that, okay, social media is one really powerful way to reach a lot of people if your goal is education and sharing curiosity and passion. But there's got to be other things that we could be doing as well. And so starting the nonprofit was really a commitment to sort of diversify the ways that we try to reach out and connect with people about this passion for plants. And of course, the book is maybe the most recent concrete example of some of the things we've been doing outside of social media to try to achieve that. Yeah.
I'd like to add one other thing to Ben's statement, which is we have this metaphor for thinking about the organization, right? We used to be a social media page, and then we incorporated, and now we're a nonprofit with a social media page. So the way that we sort of think about the organization is maybe the metaphor is pretty on the nose, but it's like a branch of a tree, where the sort of organization is the branch and each thing that we do is a leaf, right? So the social media page is a leaf. It's a pretty big leaf. It's photosynthesizing a lot, assimilating a lot of carbon. The book is another leaf. We have many other things that we're diversifying into. We have just started an internship program last year and such. So that's really a major shift of the organization over the last few years, is sort of recognizing this sort of framework, right? Of like, what is the organization and what are the different leaves and initiatives?
I love that. And so when it came to the book, were you approached by the publisher? Did they find you through your social media?
Yeah, that's exactly how it worked. So the publisher, Story Publishing, who sort of specializes in nature and how-to and DIY kind of space, which is a great fit for our organization. Really getting out there, getting your hands dirty, spending time in nature is what we're all about. They reached out to us because we had built this large following, and basically they asked, have you ever thought about maybe writing a book with some of your ideas? And our response was, yes, we have. We've been thinking about it for a while and writing down our notes. Here's our pitch. And they were like, whoa. So we were ready to go. I don't know. I guess in our heads, we were imagining slowly putting together a pitch for a book until we were ready to reach out to publishers, and it ended up happening the other way around. But yeah, it was great timing when they reached out. We were ready to pitch this idea, and they went for it, and they helped make it even better.
I always like to hear about, great serendipity and moments like that, and where things come together. And so, Jacob, you were talking about raising plant awareness. So I'm a huge proponent of fighting green blindness.
Mm-hmm.
And so that phenomenon where people just go about their everyday lives and just don't see plants at all. Like they don't
Mm-hmm.
see it as part of their lives. They don't see, connect the food they eat to where it's a grown thing. It grew somewhere, or the air they breathe, or the grass that they're walking on. It's just background noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a friend and colleague, Kate Parsley is her name. It's a fantastic last name if you're interested in plants. But she actually studies these phenomena, in a sort of rigorous scientific perspective. And so she calls, what was formerly, green blindness or plant blindness, plant awareness disparity, right? And it's exactly what you described, right? Our sort of, arguably innate predisposition to seeing plants as the background to animal life, right? The green stage upon which these animals sort of play on. And really, I think, the whole mission of Let's Botanize and many other people in this field is to help, change that perspective, right? To show people how fundamentally important plants are to human life, but really all life, right? And to help allow people to have the tool set, right? And the skill set to be able to observe plants and appreciate them, because as you were saying, right, they're everywhere and they can't move, so you can get really close and you can observe them all the time, and they're really, if you can find fascination, right, in these observations and in connecting with plants, you can sort of like set up your life so that you're fascinated all the time, because plants are everywhere. You're on vacation, you're walking on the sidewalk, or you see a plant and you look at it and you closely observe the leaf structure, closely observe the way the flower is shaped, right? And you can find interest and fascination in that. How wonderful of a life is that, just from a personal mindfulness perspective, does that, bring you?
I think so. We can define botanizing as examining plants, like in general terms, but also being present, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It's all about careful observation. And it's as simple as paying attention to plants and being curious about them. And that attentiveness has a lot to do with being present and mindfulness. Botanizing is a natural history hobby, like bird watching is for paying attention to birds. And this one is just the one that's all about paying attention to plants. And it's something that probably a lot of people are doing, especially gardeners. I mean, gardeners are all botanizing to some degree. Maybe we don't have the word in our popular vocabulary anymore. It used to be a very popular word in the 19th century, but one of the things I guess we're trying to do is put a name on that so people can identify with it and communicate with others who share the interest, and maybe bring the word and the hobby as, something people can identify as a real hobby and interest back into the limelight a little bit.
Something to add to that is, we didn't come up with the word. Has been implied, right? So if you look at the Google word graph that they compile for the use of it, as Ben was saying, it's sort of the word usage peaks in the 19th century. And this is primarily reflected in the popularity of the hobby of botanizing, particularly in sort of Victorian, England and such, right? So that's, again, it was really popular back in the day, and we're trying to sort of bring it back into vogue.
Yeah, I think my first encounter with it was at an antique store and coming across a botanizing kit.
Cool. Wow.
And I was like, what is this and what? Why? And so it, it had a little sketch pad, and then it had a magnifying glass and all these little instruments and things to measure and to record your plant. So, and then the other way you come from it sometimes is people who keep herbariums themselves, or I've seen lots of collectors who are snipping a plant part or seed collecting, but botanizing is all of that and more. And so gardeners, as you say, are already doing it. We just didn't put the word to it, because it sounds like an old fashioned thing, but I think it's going to be bigger than birding, you guys. I think people are already doing it. I just think people are already doing it. They're just, not putting a name to it. And so who are some of those famous botanizers, past and present, that you all admire? We'll start with Ben.
It's a great question. I happen to be reading an account of the father and son botanizing team of the Bartrams, who were important in actually 18th century, early colonial North America. England was ravenously hungry for new, interesting plants that they could put in their gardens, and contracting the Bartrams and others to go out and explore. And there were some quirky guys. I mean, there wasn't really an institution set up to train botanists, so they were essentially self-trained and very highly adept amateurs. And they wrote about their trips and expeditions, and had some fantastical adventures, seeing alligators for the first time and being like, what is that? Mm-hmm. So they were, exploring, and they were actually sending material directly to Carolus Linnaeus, who was developing the system of taxonomy we still use today. And Linnaeus was getting to name all these strange plants that were new to European eyes in the 18th century, coming from North America. I've been reading about those guys recently.
How about you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think past, it's hard to not include Charles Darwin in that mix, actually, because a lot of the time, or most of the time maybe, people think of when they think of Darwin, of course they think of evolution and the theory of natural selection as the sort of mechanism there, but most of his books are actually on plants. And so Darwin was a botanist, whether maybe the zoological people want to admit that or not. So I think he made a lot of careful observations of plants, of course, in a scientific perspective too. But that's an exciting, person that I think about. And there are other, older folks. Someone in the fern world that I think about who was more on the academic side was Frederick Orpen Bauer, who wrote mostly, he did a lot of research in ferns in the early 90s, but he also wrote some popular science books about, how to look at plants, how to observe. So yeah, there are a lot of people past that focused on plants that are exciting to talk about. But there are a lot of folks, that are working on spreading plant appreciation now as well. We have friends and colleagues on social media, as well as our sort of professional colleagues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point that Jacob makes. We are maybe shouting the vocab word botanize the loudest, but there's a really great community on social media of other creators who are doing great work. Some of the people we think of are like Crime Pays, but Botany Doesn't. If people might be familiar with Joey, who runs that account. He's an incredible botanist, super talented, a very charismatic, very unique character himself, but really knows his plants. And even other people outside of the maybe strict botanist category, like we have a good friend, Gina, who makes art. She's a photographer and goes by the handle Wild Gina. And she really focuses, I'd say, primarily on plants and does such an incredible job noticing details that'll make a beautiful photograph and then knowing how to capture it. So yeah, there's some great people on social media aside from ourselves. There's a little community who I think are really spreading appreciation and curiosity about plants right now.
It sounds like a few great people to follow. And I'm going to chime in with a couple botanist heroes or botanizer heroes, or sheroes, I should say, of mine. I'm going to say Elizabeth Blackwell, who did some incredible plant and artwork. And if you look up her herbal from Britain, I don't think anybody compares today with the artwork and the examination she did of plants in her sketches. And I would also put in there Rachel Carson, even though sometimes she's, known from her sea research and birding and other things. I think she did a ton of botanizing as well and observation. And if you read, obviously, Silent Spring, that will bring you a lot to botanizing.
I'll also add one other person in that same vein. Anna Atkins was actually one of the first to make cyanotypes of plants and algae, and it was in the late 1700s, early 1800s.
No, 1800s. Yeah, but yeah, right. She's credited with producing the first photographically illustrated book, and it was these cyanotypes of marine algae. Incredibly, incredibly beautiful.
Wow, cool.
Definitely worth looking at.
I'll have to check that out.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with you all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
How can the normal person, we'll just say the lay person, use your book to go out and botanize?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing that we like to say is that everyone's a botanist, whether you know it or not. And it's because, you're interacting with plants all the time, whether it's sort of, looking at the grain in your wood furniture or, looking at the way seeds are arranged when you're cutting open a tomato or a cucumber, right? We're very familiar with plants and plant structures already. But the book itself is set up in sort of 3 sections. But before the sections, actually, we have what we are calling our 5 tenets of botanizing. So if you sort of open to page 12 of the book, right, we have our 5 tenets of botanizing. So these are things like botanize any place, any time, get as close as possible, engage all your senses, identification is not the end game, rediscover the familiar. So these are sort of ways that people can, that we try to promote the hobby, right? Try to get into it. The book itself is organized into 3 sections: parts, patterns, and perspectives. So parts focuses on morphology and structure and anatomy, and is really concerned with the different ways that plants, build their bodies and how they're organized. Patterns focuses on processes of plant survival. So, plant development, physiology, how they interact with other organisms in the landscape and their ecology and their evolution. And then perspectives really focuses on our mindful engagement and connection with plants as living organisms, not because they're like us, but because they're so fundamentally different from us.
And I should say the actual structure of the book is a series of 100 exercises, small exercises. We call them prompts. A prompt will be something like, what's the smallest vein you can see in the leaf of a plant? Or something like, can you find a root growing above ground? And each of those prompts, that's a little exercise to go out into the world and do wherever you can. It could be your kitchen, it could be a sidewalk, it could be a national park. And then each is followed up with some text sort of diving into that structure or that phenomenon that we're trying to teach about. And our goal here really was to turn botanizing and learning about botany into a game. Basically, Jacob and I spent a lot of time in school, and we still both work at schools. And so we're very familiar with classroom learning. People go to school to learn in a very particular way. And we very much recognize that people who are not in school aren't necessarily looking to, sit through lectures and take notes and then take exams. And so we wanted to really find ways to teach about botanizing that don't feel like school at all. And the book is sort of, hopefully a strong attempt at doing that, at turning learning into more of a game where there's 101 of these exercises, and You can do them. You can find different ways to do them. You can challenge yourself. Oh, can I do prompt, 82 in my kitchen and outside? But along the way of doing these little exercises, you're hopefully going to learn a lot.
And I'll also add, we wrote these prompts when we sort of sat down to do it. What we really thought about was what goes through our mind when we walk up to a plant and observe it, right? Because we all have these little algorithms for every decision we make in every day. And that's also true when we walk up to plants and look at them. And so we tried to ask ourselves, how do we tune our attention to, the way that a leaf is structured, the way it's placed along the stem, the actual, the patterns along the edges of a leaf, the structure of a flower, the architecture of a tree, where a root is placed. And what does that tell us about how the plant is building its body, what species it is, how this structure may have evolved, how it helps it function or otherwise. So we really were like dissecting our own brains in how we look at plants. And that's really how we crafted these 101 prompts.
And like what Ben said, that you do it where you are or anywhere, because I think we are all aware it's a privilege to have a backyard or garden space to be able to botanize at home. So if you don't have access to that, you could maybe visit a local park or your favorite public garden.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned early that we met in grad school based at the Arnold Arboretum, which is an incredible public park devoted to plants and plant diversity. And it's both a research institution of Harvard and a Boston city park that's free and open to the public every day. And it was such a great setting for us to sort of develop these ideas and learn how to look at plant diversity and also watch the public interact with plant diversity and try to figure out ways that tend to be most engaging for people and connect best with them. But yeah, public gardens are an incredible resource, and so much work goes into maintaining them and curating them and keeping them beautiful, and extremely grateful to the Arboretum staff and everyone who works at public gardens.
Yeah. And I would also add that botanizing outside is fantastic, but you can also botanize, inside. So your houseplants are things you can botanize, your food, even again, the wood grain in your furniture, right? These are all things that you can sort of carefully observe and understand, or try to understand, right? The different processes of how plants grow and survive. I mean, just an example, in the Knoxville airport, there's this beautiful installation of plants and sort of water installation right when you walk in. And, if I'm not going to miss my flight, I'm not going to be late for my flight, I'll often, walk over there and take a look and botanize those plants, right? So because plants are, integral to human life and all life, they're everywhere. They make up, a lot of the food we eat and the sort of things we build furniture and homes out of. They're ubiquitous. So they're always around and always available to observe.
And I definitely appreciate it on a snowy day, a rainy day, a day where you're just like, I don't feel like getting suited up into my botanizing outfit, whatever that may be, and my botanizing kit from Victorian era, putting that on and going out and on a hike, that you can literally do it on your bedroom windows.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we should shout out the best single tool. If you're not going to have a whole kit, we like to analogize again to bird watching, another natural history hobby. Bird watchers have binoculars, and botanists or botanizers have a hand lens. And that's basically a small pocket-sized magnifying glass. Something like X magnification is usually good to see all the cool, intricate structures of a plant. Plants don't move, so you can get as close as you want with that hand lens and really see them from new perspective and discover new cool things about them.
Yeah, a lot of my plant nerd friends, we all carry little loops.
Yep, perfect.
That's usually for examining and looking for insect, like, aphids on our roses, or we're looking for problems. We're not looking for positive things usually. We're usually using that loop to find out what's eating this or what is the problem on it. But what else would you include in a botanizing kit? I'm thinking like your smartphone is probably one of your best tools now, that the Victorians would have love to have had.
Yeah, absolutely. Something like a journal, but a great way to journal and keep a record of what you're seeing now is iNaturalist, the platform that, sort of citizen science platform for keeping a record of what you're seeing and then getting community help to identify what you're seeing. Yeah, absolutely. And iNaturalist built a tool called Seek that uses your camera to sort of try to identify what you're pointing your phone at. Oftentimes, especially if I'm in a new habitat, I'll start with Seek to try to get a sense of an ID if there's a plant I don't know, and then take Seek's suggestion and then go onto iNaturalist and look at other observations. Hey, does that really make sense? Or if I'm lucky to have a field guide or a key, start with Seek's suggestion and then try to verify with some other tools. But yeah, a smartphone is extraordinarily powerful thing to carry with you now.
Yeah, I think also a smartphone has a camera, but camera as well as if you have another type of a camera. But also, if you're interested in preserving your specimens, I mean, something that Ben and I do a lot of is both professionally and in terms of just a hobbyist is pressing plants. So there are, I think maybe all of us have pressed flowers in a book, but there are ways to do that, more sophisticated tools than just putting it between a book so you don't damage the pages. So even sort of making a small little makeshift plant press could be a great tool in the.
And for a plant press, you're just trying to get things flat and dry. That's really what it's all about. It's funny. I've inadvertently trained my little daughter, who's 3, to look at especially plant parts out in the world as potential specimens. So she'll bring stuff to me now and say, Dad, look at this pine cone. It's a specimen. We should bring it home. We usually have a pile of sticks and stuff just inside the door.
Nice. Yeah, I used to use the old Encyclopedia Britannica as my plant press as a child, and any 4-leaf clovers I would find would go in the wherever I can stick them. So you want to be able to open up any of those without having some 4-leaf clovers spill out on you.
Yeah, there's actually some great, people collect coins, right? Ben and I stumbled upon this, I think it was someone on social media, and they had this big coin book, but it was all, I think it was 4-leaf clover. It was clover leaves.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 4-leaf clovers. It was an incredible collection.
So, yeah.
But that's one amazing thing about plants is because, this is a sort of unique aspect of their biology compared to animals. They develop modular, bodies. So we can pull a leaf or a flower off, which is a whole organ or system of organs that are performing important functions for the plant, but they're usually completely redundant with other copies on the same plant. So we could pull a leaf or a flower off and not hurt that plant at all, right? And press it and have some memento, something to remember that individual or that species that we encountered. It's sort of a unique aspect that's possible for this hobby of botanizing. Can't really do that with animals so easily.
Or other people. Like you can say, could I have a lock of your hair? But that would be still a little creepy, but yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will also say something that maybe is a little lighter of a lift than sort of, pressing a whole plant and all that I like to do is sometimes I'll just pull a single leaf off. Like this is what I did last year. I was focusing on some of the oaks. And I'd pull a leaf, I'd identify it, I'd write on the back of the leaf after it's dry the species, and then I'd put it in the page of the field guide that I was using at the time, just as a little thing to remind me next time.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great thing also to remember some of your travels.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's legal to bring that plant part back.
Yeah, that's very important. Yeah.
Just make sure.
And also, if you're visiting a public garden or private garden, ask, some things can be picked up off the ground. That's fair game. An acorn that fell is usually okay. But obviously, we don't want to go around a public garden just ripping off rose heads or something crazy.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah. So speaking of one of the exercises in your book related to trees, so number 81, spend 10 consecutive minutes with one tree. And somebody who's borderline ADHD like myself, that's a tall order, that 10 minutes.
Yeah.
What am I doing in those 10 minutes?
Oh, that's what you're going to have to discover.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that amount of time feels hopefully doable to find that amount of time in your schedule, but that's a long time. If you just stand and sit with one tree for that amount of time, you will realize how long 10 minutes is. But it's enough time, hopefully, for your mind to wander and your eyes to wander. And if you're primed, okay, with this 10 minutes, I'm paying attention to a tree. I think you'd be surprised the sort of things that you start noticing and thinking about and connecting, to other plants you've seen or to your experience living in the world as an animal. I mean, hopefully what you're going to start thinking about is what it might be like to live in the world as this very different type of organism, right? A tree.
Yeah, I think so. There's two interesting things there. One is, right, plants live on such different time scales to us, right? So if you're spending 10 minutes with a tree, as Ben was saying, you can, it's a not only an observational activity, but it's also an opportunity of mindfulness, right? Of sitting there and looking at this plant and appreciating this plant and being like, especially if it's let's say a long-lived pine, if you're, out in the West Coast or something, something like a pine can live, thousands of years. And so appreciating and thinking about plants as these fundamentally different organisms that are living at these vastly different timescales than us as a species. The flip side of that is there are some processes of plant growth and physiology that happen super rapidly, right? So the way that water moves through a tree, maybe the way that light is being harvested and captured and transported, right? And actually leveraged for carbon sequestration and photosynthesis, right? These processes that are happening at such small timescales that we also can't perceive them, right? The way that they're opening and closing the pores on their leaves called stomata. That's one aspect of it. But this other aspect of it is the process of active observation, which we really think is at the core of botanizing and really other natural history hobbies as well. And so I think the way we analogize it is, active listening. You can hear something without actively listening to it. It's sort of an intentional process there, versus active observation is intentionally observing things, and plants in particular. It's amazing what you can observe and what you can see from just either spending 10 minutes with something or repeatedly viewing it. So I teach a plant diversity and evolution course at the University of Tennessee. And the lab for the course is we set up a bunch of plants, but mostly tropical plants from the greenhouse, especially if it's in the wintertime. And I have some prompts for them to do, but most of it is, hey, spend 10 minutes looking at this plant. And it's amazing. You read their notes and their lab notebooks. It's amazing. The first things you see, you think you've seen it all in the first minute, right? And then you keep looking, and then 5 minutes. Oh, I've noticed the hairs on the upper side of the leaf are kind of different from the hairs on the lower side of the leaf. And then 7 minutes goes by and you're like, oh, actually, the petals are slightly different shapes and slightly organized in different ways. Or, the stamen are organized in this interesting way, and the color of the lower and upper side of the petals. And right. So all these things, as you continue to look and continue to observe, there's always something more to see.
I just attended the Galanthus gala with a bunch of Galanthus files. And I will say that, they are experts in this, and what you talk about in close observation, that you have to be obsessed with the tiny little snowdrop and the tiniest difference in one petal. One is slightly elongated more than another. One has a little bit more of a green blush than another, just tiny differences. And some of them are cherished for those tiny differences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the gardening and horticulture community, we always say, we're trained as evolutionary biologists, right? And we always say gardening and horticulture primes you to be an evolutionary biologist. It primes you to really have careful understanding of the variation that exists out there, and then think about, artificial selection. Okay, which of these ones is beautiful and therefore higher fitness, and we're going to carry it forward to future generations, and having a sense of how variation reappears or disappears, how you can get something to be true breeding. And it all starts from that ability to really carefully observe fine-grained detail.
Many of the prompts in the book are like really getting down into it. So like seeing the veins on a petal, counting the number of petals, of course, but also the different ways that plants are pollinated, trying to discern who that pollinator might be for that particular flower just by its shape, I think is a super fascinating botanizing exercise.
Right. We
Yeah.
like to use, so that specific prompt about something like, can you guess how a flower is pollinated based on its appearance? And we use that as an example of one of our tenets, which is you don't need to identify things. Plant identification can be kind of intimidating because there are something like 300,000 different named species of plants. There's an enormous breadth of diversity. But you can really learn a lot about their biology and become curious and fascinated with different aspects of plants without knowing, the Latin binomial necessarily. And the pollinator phenomenon, we're getting at what are called pollination syndromes, these suites of traits. Like, is it a tubular flower that makes a lot of nectar, or is it an open face flower with a nice landing pad? And what colors does it have? What is it producing an odor, and when does it open? These sorts of things that you can observe without knowing any Latin binomials. And then you can take those observations and make cool inferences about what animals is this trying to attract? What animals have evolved to interact with this?
I think it makes it super accessible for the beginner and also, of course, the expert. And so with the book, how can listeners purchase the book and find out more or contact either of you?
Yeah. So the book is sold wherever you buy books. It's on the Hachette website, but it's also, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all these other places. So yeah, we can definitely provide links, but you can find us. You can contact us at letsbotanize@gmail.com. But you can also find us at social media with the handle @letsbotanize, all sort of one. And we also have a website, letsbotanize.org. So those are the many ways to get in touch.
Fortunately, at least for now, pretty much everything we do has the same name. So the book is called Let's Botanize. Our social media is Let's Botanize. Our website. So if you Google Let's Botanize, hopefully you'll encounter all of these various links.
And I'll put those links in the show notes. And I do want to note that Let's has a possessive S, L-E-T, possessive, but in your social media, you're not going to be able to, or in a email name, obviously, you would drop that.
Yeah, I don't think they like that.
Some of the punctuation is not welcome
for sure
in online searches. So I want to ask some final questions while I have you, and that is, were there any exercises or favorite botanizing things that you weren't able to include in your 101 ways in the book? I'm sure there were a few that were left on the table.
Oh yeah, they're definitely. Okay, Jacob, while you think on that, I can share a little anecdote, which is our first version of this idea was to have 365 exercises. So there was one you could do every day, and the publisher immediately pointed out, okay, what is this going to be, a 700-page book? And so we were strongly encouraged to shorten that. And I think it was the right choice, and that was something very helpful the publisher did. But we had, a spreadsheet with many prompts. I'm not sure about one that we feel we left out. I will say we had an experience which is maybe the opposite of that, which is when we started getting ready to turn in the draft, we had moments like, wait a minute, we haven't done enough about roots, and then trying to add in things that we thought were missing. I mean, there's effectively infinite of these little exercises you could come up with. We wanted to make sure we're covering all the important bases.
I think we, I think as Ben was saying, we had so many, the list of prompts is infinite, and maybe there's a second edition, but I think what we really tried to do across the different sections of the book was cover, most of the different fundamental aspects of, plant growth and function and morphology and evolution and ecology. And there's a little bit of something for everything and everyone. There's definitely some aspects that we could have, went deeper on, but yeah, I think we hit all the different parts
without being 700 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be a little bit much to carry. So it's kind of, your book is a little bit bigger than, say, the old Reader's Digest, but it's not a pocket book, but you could certainly fit it, in a bag easily.
It's kind of field guide size.
That's excellent. And what are your plans for the future?
That's a good question.
Great question.
Well,
I mean,
we have a lot of upcoming book talks and things that we're excited to do. We're going to be speaking at the New York Botanic Gardens, and Wild Wonder Foundation is hosting an online event. So yeah, there's several things in that capacity. Ben, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sort of on a broader scale, we're really thinking about how we can spread this hobby. The hobby is really a concrete thing that we think community can form around, and is hopefully a less intimidating way for people to really get a pretty sophisticated knowledge of plants and deep appreciation for them. And I really perked up when you mentioned finding that antique botanizing kit. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to think through now is, okay, for this to be a hobby, what are the things that people need or would really use to go out and do this hobby and feel like they have, and that helps them identify as someone who is a bird watcher, right? Is a botanizer. So we're trying to think about some of those things. Now this book is hopefully part of that kit for a lot of people. But yeah, we're excited to keep being part of a movement, a wave to bring back this word and this hobby of botanizing.
Oh, I'm excited to see how this movement grows, pun intended. Thank you so much, Ben and Jacob.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun to talk.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Pea plant profile. Peas, Pisum sativum, are an early season annual crop we can cultivate in the Mid-Atlantic's cool, wet spring months and again in the early autumn. There are 3 main kinds of peas. Which ones you grow are up to your personal preference. Snap peas produce fat edible pods filled with peas. Snow peas have flat edible pods with barely formed peas inside. Shelling peas have tough, thick pods that are pretty inedible. Inside are sweet, plump peas. Peas are hardy to USDA zones 3 to 11 and are native to the Mediterranean region, Western Asia, and the Near East. Many pea varieties prefer the early spring mild weather days and practically melt when our hot, humid summers arrive. Tradition says to plant peas on St. Patrick's Day, but you can do so as soon as the soil can be worked. Plant them in a full sun spot and keep them consistently watered. I recommend soaking peas for 4 to 6 hours before planting them. This gives you a bit of a head start in getting the seeds to break dormancy and germinate. You can also plant them in a container. Don't forget to add a small trellis in to support the pea plant tendrils at the same time as you plant them. I place a cover cloth over them by mid-spring to keep them cool on very hot days and to keep critters from eating them. Once the peas form flowers and then pods, harvest them often to encourage more pods. Peas, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, it finally feels like spring has sprung. I have crocus, snowdrops, hellebores, and winter aconite, along with witch hazel in bloom. In garden tips that we shared this week, we focused on the science of phenology, seasonal indicators. They tell us that when the forsythia blooms, it's time for pruning roses, planting peas, onion sets, and lettuce. In local gardening events, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you might like to attend Brent and Becky's Spring Garden Tour on Saturday, March 14th. That repeats on March 18th, March 21st, and March 25th. They are located in Tidewater, Virginia. Reservations are required, and the fee is $10 per person. You could purchase your tickets at brentandbeckysbulbs.com. You'll take a leisurely stroll around their trowel fields and gardens at their farm and home, see spring flowering bulbs during peak blooming time, different planting combinations incorporating trees, shrubs, bulbs, and perennials, plus learn a little history of the land that you'll be touring. Another event you might want to attend is virtual and online. It is hosted by the Potomac Rose Society on Sunday, March 15th at 2 p.m. You can register for that at potomacrose.org. That is a talk on roses and clematis, a match made in heaven. Prepare to be inspired as the extraordinary world of clematis reveals itself to you. And then finally, Silver Spring Garden Club is hosting an in-person talk at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, Maryland on Monday, March 16th at 7:30 p.m. That is Growing Great Tomatoes and Peppers with speaker Carrie Engel, horticulturist at Valley View Farms. She'll be talking about how to grow tomato and pepper seedlings, also what varieties do best in our region. Finally, the March issue of Washington Gardener magazine is out, and in that issue is a cover story on our winning garden photo contest images, and also tips for growing healthy staghorn ferns, dealing with weedy mallow plants, how to enjoy lilies in containers, a bit about growing skunk cabbage, changes at the USNA's Bonsai Museum, and much, much more. You can find the March 2026 issue of Washington Gardener magazine posted at our website, washingtongardener.com or washingtongardener.blogspot.com.
This is Christy Page with Green Prints with the last word on Dancing with Marigolds, a story by Larry Johnson. I have a t-shirt that reads, "This is the dawning of the age of asparagus." It always gets a few chuckles, but I wish I had one that said, "Dancing with Marigolds." For me, marigolds are guardians of the garden, bright and unpretentious, protecting every patch of vegetables, even my beloved asparagus. Growing asparagus has been a near constant in my life, reaching back to childhood when I'd cut fresh spears in my grandparents' garden. Asparagus was my first garden job, and I even worked in an asparagus field near where the Mall of America stands today. Then came the Vietnam War, a quick marriage, and a call to serve. My young bride and I struggled on my return, mostly for practical reasons. I took comfort in the garden, growing food that kept us healthy and stretched our budget. But my wife despised gardening, seeing it as another drain on our finances. The only flowers I planted back then were marigolds, lining the garden's edge like quiet soldiers, warding off pests. Sadly, they couldn't save the marriage. In the year it ended, my asparagus patch withered. I took it as a sign, the end of one chapter and the hesitant beginning of another. I didn't know then that life's colors would bloom again. A few months later, while recuperating from a health scare, a friend named Elaine brought me a single rose. That simple act struck a chord. A rose. No one had ever brought me anything so beautiful just because. I'd never had much use for flowers. They were too frivolous. But Elaine, with her love of dance and her grounding in psychology, taught me something new. Perhaps my aversion to flowers stemmed from a long-forgotten childhood nightmare where flowers chased me, trying to tell me something I hadn't understood. Elaine and I eventually married, and I chose marigolds to be engraved on our wedding rings, a nod to my past and an embrace of new growth. She even helped me see marigolds in a new light, not just as pragmatic protectors, but as cheerful companions in our garden. And over time, I found I didn't just enjoy gardening with her, I was learning to dance both in the garden and in life. Together, we grew flowers and vegetables, taking delight in both beauty and practicality. Now we garden side by side, sowing laughter and memories. I've come to see that flowers like marigolds and roses are more than decoration. They're symbols of resilience, hope, and yes, a bit of dancing. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at grapefruits.com.
Thank you for listening to Garden DC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to Garden DC Podcast Episode 43, Galanthus, Episode 106, Ancient Plants, Episode 219, Native Ferns. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at UDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. My favorite way to botanize is to take seeds out of their packets and see if I can guess which plants they belong to. It's like Mother Nature's matching game. Some are easy, like hollyhocks, marigolds, and various beans, but others are real stumpers. I urge you to try this botanizing game yourself and see how well you do. Happy gardening!